that they probably.
Happiness in the city. This is Barbara, and it is just a wonderful opportunity for us to focus this time on happy things. And I have done this search for happiness, pursuit of happiness for a long time. And I realized that this aspect of happiness that can only come from our contact with God. That there's a certain part of us that is created to have that connection. So I started searching for the meaning of it. What does it mean? In contrast to ordinary ways of understanding what happiness is. And I realized that that particular search for happiness is impossible without asking God to participate in it. In other words, this is not something that can come from our own heart and mind. This is something that requires God's presence in it. And this turned out to be a very difficult thing. It's not easy. You cannot just call the Lord and, hey, how are you, buddy? How are you doing today? You can't do that. There's a certain majesty in approaching the throne of the Lord. But I know that it comes with great benefits. King David danced before the throne of the Lord. He sang before the throne of the Lord, and he played music. Why is it that in my entire upbringing, which includes a lot of musical education, we were never allowed to even think about it? And I think that the reason has deep roots. And today, I'd like to focus on the teachings from Psalm 74 because it talks about this need or presence of the Lord. The psalm begins with lamentation that God abandoned his sheep. It begins with those words. The day is thine, the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared. Oh no, this was go forth. Sorry, but this is actually kind of divine direction because it talks about the ownership. Day is thine, the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. So here is this help I get from the Lord that it has to come with the understanding that the earth, the sun, the light, everything around us is owned by him, that he is the owner. So the concept of ownership is foundational for any presence of the Lord in our lives. And for a lot of the world today, this is big news because the world has been influenced by all kinds of ownership theories, by Marxism, Leninism, ownership of the means of production that should belong to the workers, capitalists saying that ownership belongs to those who control the capital. And we have this vast network of laws that impose meanings and restraints on all kinds of property ownership. So I begin to see that nothing about presence of the Lord can begin without acknowledging that He is the one who owns His creation, including us. So the ownership brings in freedom to be in His presence. Because as many of us have experienced, is that security blockage of even talking about God. I grew up in schools that banned the Bibles. We couldn't read the Bibles in the schools. The libraries were not allowed to have them. The only one in my family who defied that restriction was my grandma, who always had the Bible in her house. So she just firmly stood against any restraint concerning God's presence in her house and family and property. So I think that need to understand that God is the owner of all means of production. God is the owner of capital. God is the owner of everything He has created. That this is a beginning of transformation in our ways, and that can bring this possibility that our leaders will understand God's presence like King David did. He danced and sang and played music, had conversations with the Lord before the throne of the Lord. This is something so mighty, and it's hard for us to even comprehend how this is possible, but it did happen. So I sometimes think that it's possible that God danced with King David too, that He opened up His creativity concerning music, dance, speech, leadership, singing, and that is something that is magnificent. Why aren't we searching for it? So Psalm 74, now this is the beginning. O God, why hast thou cast us off forever? Why doth thine anger smoke against the sheep of thy pasture? So King David here asks the Lord why He abandoned his sheep. So King David understands that it's possible to be in the presence of the Lord, but also that God may just close that connection and cast his sheep out. Very profound warning about what can happen when God leaves the pasture and the sheep have no connection with Him. The psalm continues. Remember thy congregation which thou hast purchased of old, the rod of thine inheritance which thou hast redeemed, this Mount Zion wherein thou hast dwelt. We have a lot of talk these days about Israel, but this is where Mount Zion is. So it is the inheritance from the Lord, but it's also where God's presence has been for at least last 6,000 years in a visible way. Christianity today comes from that connection. So we have to really understand that relationship between God's presence with the creation that he made, also his absence. And what are the causalities of this? That's a very important question, but I'm not a theologian, so I'm simply learning it as a person that understands how important it is to know this. And at this point, I believe that God can lead me in ways that will also connect to great wisdom of the ages that he has given to past generations. The psalm continues with King David asking God to lift up thy feet unto the perpetual desolations, even all that the enemy has done wickedly in the sanctuary. So here we are beginning to understand how important sanctuary is to God. He can come into the sanctuary, because here clearly here we read about God's feet come into the location of the sanctuary, but also that he can leave the sanctuary. And the place just continues with perpetual desolations and wickedness from God's enemies. So for me, this is a very interesting knowledge, because it means that the restoration of God's presence in our lives begins with the sanctuary, with having it freed from the desolations. So it is important to know that, because some people think that sanctuaries are irrelevant for God's presence, but here clearly this is very important. The psalm continues as David is communicating with the Lord and says, thine enemies roar in the midst of thy congregations. They set up the ensigns for sign. Wow. This is something that is simply enlightening, because it shows that the healing of the desolations come with God coming back to the sanctuaries and clearing them up according to his ways. So this is not something that King David just orders the sanctuary people to do. he knows that something of that magnitude can only be made right by God himself. So how does it apply to us today? In all the centuries of the Lord all over the world, and there are millions of them, we should focus on bringing God back to them. So that's where the new life and God's ownership would come, and then create beautiful peace with all of those connected to those centuries. So why don't we understand how important they are for us today? Let's continue this amazing psalm. A man was famous according as he had lifted up axes upon the thick trees. So this shows the beauty that had to be used to create sanctuaries, because God in another psalm commands us to worship him in the beauty of holiness. So the workmanship, the beauty of sanctuaries is important. And David continues, but now they break down the carved work thereof at once with axes and hammers. So this shows kinetic hatred of God from those who hate him. And Russia experienced this during the revolution and after revolution, where communists came and destroyed enormous number of sanctuaries. And eventually there were only 7,000 of them left. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there are 40,000 and growing. So we see from this psalm that God's presence is slowly returning to Russia, and he is the one who can bring in peace and restore beauty and life in Russia. Here we see that it will not happen from political decision making. It will happen from returning ownership of Russia back to God. That's where the peace will come. That is right now ravaging Europe and Russia and the whole world. So I ask God for that he returns to his sanctuaries in all territories of former Soviet Union and restores his presence and his ownership of the land. So not the workers' ownership of the land, but God's ownership of the land, including the workers. And I think that this is the miracle of peace that will bring beautiful contact between Russia and the whole world, and will end up in people dropping the ways of understanding their role in the processes of economic life. Now the psalm continues. They have cast fire into thy sanctuary. They have defiled by casting down the dwelling place of thy name to the ground. For me, this is new because it means that the name of the Lord needs a dwelling place. When the name of the Lord is homeless, it is a form of blasphemy. So I see the importance having sanctuaries as dwelling places for the name of the Lord, so that there is respect of it. And also it means that the name of the Lord requires space to be present and to live. And I know that my ancestors understood that, but my generation did not really understand this. And we have this conflict between sanctuaries, those that survived, and the understanding that those sanctuaries are for God's name to be in it, for God's presence to be there. So I think that if we want to have peace in the world, we need the presence of the honor of the world. Because without the rightful honor, the Lord of the world, all those usurers come in his place and they create destruction and violence and chaos. And I think that this continues with the statement that they said in their hearts, let us destroy them together. They have burned up all the synagogues of God in their land. That's pretty much what happened in Russia after the revolution. But where it ended up is a horrible World War II. And now the whole world is in danger because of what is happening in the conflicts there. So we see here that the solution is to restore God's presence in the synagogues and sanctuaries of God in the land, and letting God create peace and the right order. So that brings in leadership of God to lead the militaries and the armies, because when God blesses militaries and all the security forces with his presence, they have the right measure of knowledge and guidance. When militaries and security forces follow wickedness, then they collapse, because sooner or later desolations destroy them too. So it is in our interest to affirm God's presence in his sanctuaries as part of national security. international security, world security. And I think that this psalm clearly states that when we do that and let God's name live and dwell in his centuries, that creates his presence in the land, that is creating a level of divine ownership and love that blesses all his creation. I wish I had been taught this when I was a little girl in grade school, but I wasn't. But God is teaching me that, and I'm sharing this with you. And I encourage you to ask God to teach you about this too, because we need to raise our communications to the level that our current generation doesn't have yet. And that is to the level of knowing that our landlord is God himself, that he is the one who creates housing, who creates ways for us to live in peace and to prosper. So that's the happiness that I'm only beginning to understand now. And let the divine happiness come to us, to America, to Russia, to the whole world, Poland, and all the other European countries, to all the countries of the world, and let that beautiful ownership in God's name reveal itself.